this show is called God's Views on Political News. And this is all about us examining what's really happening today in politics and the news based upon what God has said would be occurring in his own words in the Bible. And for those who don't know who I am, my background is that I'm a licensed psychotherapist. I'm also a former practicing family law attorney and a conservative online talk show host of Stand for Truth Radio with Susan Knowles. I'm on Spreaker, podcaster on iHeartRadio, and you can also find information on me on susanknowles.com. And so, Bill, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Well, for those who don't know who I am, I'm Bill Cloud, and for close to 20 years now, my wife and I have had a ministry we call Shorashim. That's a Hebrew word that means roots, because what we do is we try to teach the roots of our faith as Christians. Why do we as Christians believe this, and why do we do that? And that has kind of led into getting into other things, particularly what the Bible has to say about end time events. And in fact, that's how Susan and I come to know one another, because about a year ago I wrote a book called Esau Rising, and Susan was actually the first person to interview me to promote the book. And so that's how we kind of got connected. And so my view is going to be looking more from a biblical perspective, and to kind of hopefully shed some insight on how should we interpret these things that are going on politically and culturally, and how do we handle them from a spiritual point of view. So, and hopefully working together, being the news junkie that Susan is, she's always going to keep us supplied with things to talk about, and hopefully this is going to really help people understand, the greater story behind just the news story.
Yeah, and I think it's a really good thing to do, because when you just focus on the news, it can be very depressing. But when you get the biblical perspective and to kind of know exactly what's going on and why, I think it does it sends more encouragement to people than discouragement, right? When you agree,
Right.
Bill?
Right. Well, things that are going on in the world are temporal. Those things that are making the news, those things that are going to pass away are temporal. And so our duty as believers is to look beyond the temporal things and see what God is saying in these things, through these things. And sometimes even those things that we perceive as being wicked and evil, even through those things, God has a way of speaking to us if we listen with spiritual ears. And so that's what we're going to try to do. We're going to try to look beyond the camouflage that is the temporal world and see those things that are truly meaningful, those things that are eternal, because those are the things that as believers, and I'm making the assumption here that most people joining us are Christians, are believers. Those are the things that we need to really focus on and embrace, even as we look at these headlines that make us crazy, that make us shout at the television, if you're like me. But the
not at all.
The spiritual aspect of things is the greater story here, I guess you'd say.
Yeah, and while we're talking, feel free to comment and ask any questions and everything that you want to ask us, and things that you want to know. Susan is saying, it's a time in the video that she's been confused about a lot of things. Well, Susan, I think that a lot of us have been confused about a lot of things because, Bill, the way I'm looking at it, sometimes we're not even getting the truth in the news and not knowing really what's going on. So how can we even feel with listening to the news that comfortable one way or the other when you feel that you're being lied to most of the time?
Well, that is very frustrating, and that's why I think maybe this is a good place to start. When we approach these things as believers, we need to make sure that before we jump to any conclusions about anything that we're hearing, frankly, whether it's from a source that we consider to be questionable, I won't mention any names, like CNN. Or MSNBC, But even if we're getting things from what we consider to be reliable sources, we need to wait and let's see some of the as these stories develop, what the truth really is in the matter before we jump to any conclusions or pass any judgments. Because one thing as believers that I think every person, including myself, has a problem with, particularly when we're dealing with political issues, our politics will sometimes affect our spiritual point of view.
Yeah. I mean, that's so true. I know what you're saying, Bill. This morning, there were some tweets that were going out saying Steve Bannon said X, Y, and Z. There were like 3 tweets saying that this is what he's saying about the wiretapping, what he feels that former President Obama may be put in prison when all this is over, and some other people. And I tell people, don't jump on things until you've really looked at the source. And as it turns out, that was not Steve Bannon's account. That was somebody else pretending to be Steve Bannon.
Well, Susan, if it's on the internet, it must be true.
Must be true.
I mean, it has to be true if it's on the internet.
Right.
Well, and as as you and I talk about these things, I'll be the first to admit that my political leanings can affect how I look at things spiritually. I can automatically assume that this is good and this is not good based on how I think. And so as believers, we need to be very careful to judge righteous judgment. And when it comes to the fake news aspect of things, here's what the Messiah told us in the Gospels, that, and I'm going to paraphrase it, anything that's been spoken in secret is going to be shouted from the rooftops. Anything that's been done under the cover of darkness is going to be brought into the light. And so I'm going to approach the fake news thing and all the different stories that are flying around in general this way. If God has put the Trump administration there, as it has been said, to kind of the corruption and expose the corruption, and if this is God's purpose in it, then we can rest assured that all those things that have been done in darkness are going to be brought to the light. And when they're brought to the light, then we might be surprised to find how extensive this is. And I guess what I'm trying to say here is we need to be careful not to rush to judgment in any situation. We need to be careful to be those who would draw conclusions based on what we know to be facts that are verifiable facts. And then if God is going to expose some things, chances are we're going to have to adjust our thinking as well. So I'm pretty much, I'm very conservative in my politics. I mean, just to kind of give you an insight into who I am and what I think. If I could work this out, if I could make it happen, Ronald Reagan would still be the president. So that's how I feel. Not that I agree with everything Reagan did or said, but
right.
But that's just how I feel politically. But I've come to realize that, what's the most important thing here is that what is God doing? What is God saying? And what is God saying to me through all of this? So in general, that's how I'm approaching all of these things. Now, when we get specifics, get into specifics, we can talk about some particular spiritual components of that as well.
I was just looking at a comment that Nan said that she just discovered that, that she was actually Jewish on her mother's side and that she was adopted at 3 years old. I mean, you were just talking about how things that were done in secret are coming out, and we can see that people in their own lives have that. One of the things I think the biggest thing in politics right now, and that it seems like we don't know enough about, and we're not really talking about it the way that we should, is this idea of a shadow government that was put in place by Obama. Now, Bill, that's something that, there's always been talk about a shadow government or throughout the ages, but not like this president.
Yeah. Well, let me go ahead and make all the Democrats that are listening mad. I feel that the administration, the Obama administration, is probably the most wicked this country's ever seen. I'm not saying that others weren't.
Right.
Okay? I'm not saying that others weren't corrupt. I'm not saying that others weren't wicked. But in our lifetime, I'll put it that way, this is probably one of the most wicked administrations lighting up the lighthouse in the rainbow colors to celebrate same-sex marriage, something the Bible is adamantly opposed to. All right. That's not just doing something that's questionable. That's saying, God, we don't care what you say. This is what we say. And so that is to say that I don't doubt for a moment, not a moment, that there is this embedded enclave of bureaucrats and socialists and Marxists who would love nothing more than to not only embarrass the Trump administration and to render it powerless, but I'll go so far as to say to bring the whole system down. I don't doubt that. Now, whether or not they bugged Trump and Trump Tower and those people, I don't doubt that at all. I'm kind of waiting for some of the particulars to be verified in that. But if that's true, and if it was not done lawfully, and even that is lawfully, I say that kind of tongue in cheek, then this is the evidence that what most believers have always known, and that this was a corrupt, wicked administration, an un-American administration that doesn't care about the founding principles, says what they have to say to get what they want. And I'm not here to plug the book, but Susan, remember in Esau Rising, I said that the Obama administration is the epitome of Esau, in that Esau talks a good talk, puts on a positive look, I'm your friend, even invites Jacob, embraces him to kiss him on the neck, but then wants to lead him off to the side and carry out what he's always intended to do. So that spirit, that mindset is deceptive. And so I am convinced that whatever you want to call it, the shadow government, what have you, there is an embedded enclave of people who are working day and night to try to bring down our system, not just the Trump administration, but our system of government. And I'm hopeful that some of those who have said that the Trump administration is going to be God's tool to reveal these things and to bring it into the light, I hope that's true. I hope that they will do that.
Well, I mean, if you look at what's going on, we often talk about this as being progressivism. We talk about how progressives, the one thing they want to do is, one, they want to destroy the family. That's kind of like the first step. Destroy the family, destroy any faith-based religion. And I think we really need to start calling it what it really is. It's not really progressivism, and I've called it that forever. It's communism. And a lot of people don't like to say that because they look at that as, oh, well, communism is so old and it's not hip or whatever to say that anymore. But it is exactly what it is. And when you're talking about what this former president has done, we've seen it throughout. He, in a lot of respects, didn't follow the Constitution, believed that it was an outdated document, felt that it should be done away with. We have people who are, questioning whether or not he's really a Christian as he says he is, but because of a number of different things. Yeah. So speculation on that. And then we find out now that, he didn't leave Washington like all other presidents. Moving on, he's formed an organization, the organization, OFA, the Organization for Action, not America, but for Action, where we find out that he has been training agitators, professional agitators. He's trained about 30,000 so far, and there are about 25,000 more in the process of being trained. And these are the people that go to protests and, throw things, break windows, set fires, whatever. And in addition, if that's not enough to make you think, and I don't mean you personally, but, anyone who's listening, that there is a shadow government. He has now moved Valerie Jarrett into his residence. And there's been an announcement from Eric Holder that the three of them and others are going to start filing lawsuits concerning how to redistrict so that the Democrats can maintain their power in the future.
Well, again, those things that are done in darkness will be brought to the light. But as believers, we we need to be praying for spiritual renewal more than for political renewal. I mean, I'm all on board for reversing some things that the Obama administration put in place and apparently are still trying to push forward with this quote unquote shadow government. So I'm all for things being done politically to reverse those trends. But what we're up against is not just politicians.
Right.
It's not just political philosophy. I'll go one step further. You said communism. I'm going to say this, because communism, one of its core beliefs is no God. You know, it's atheistic in nature. And
Right.
so I could make the case that communism is equivalent to the spirit of Antichrist. Because if there's no God, or if God can be whatever I want him to be, or if I can say that I'm a Christian, but I can do this that is anti-Christian or anti-biblical, that is the spirit of Antichrist. Now, I'm not saying that Obama is the Antichrist. I'm not saying that.
Right.
I'm not even hinting at that. I am just saying that's the spirit of Antichrist. Right. And the spirit of Antichrist it's been here since the beginning.
Exactly.
So we shouldn't be surprised that that spirit is going to try very desperately to pursue its agenda. And I don't have any qualms by saying that Jarrett and Holder and Obama and many people that were in that administration, because of their fruit that they bear. I mean, we know them by their fruit. Right. Well, the fruit says this is Antichrist. This is working against biblical principle. So that's why I say we need more than political renewal. Again, I celebrate the fact that there have been some positive things come forth from the Trump administration. I'm great with the fact that some things or attempts are being made to reverse some things. But here's the problem. You had a shadow government at work trying to disrupt and derail everything. And if they are successful, any positive political reforms that are made over the next 4 years can be undone in just a matter of weeks and months by the next administration. So we're not fighting just against political mindsets. We're fighting against a spiritual thing here. And therefore, there needs to be spiritual reform. Did that make any sense to you?
It makes a lot of sense. And even Penny was saying our work has just begun. And that's true. A lot of people felt like, well, if we could just get Donald Trump in instead of Hillary Clinton, then we can relax. And I see just the opposite, because now more than ever, if you look and see, our president is being attacked. And this is a spiritual attack. These people, and people on the left are attacking him almost daily to try to impeach him, to try to get rid of him. And it's not so much about him, is what you said, Bill. It is about our way of life, our world, our culture that they are trying to destroy. And the way, what I look at it is it's globalism. Mm. And that's what it's trying to do. And so it's a lot more than just Trump.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and say this. I didn't vote for Trump. I was not on the Trump train, but now he's the president. And I take that to mean, because I believe this, whether it was Clinton or Obama or Trump, I believe that the one that's in power, that's God's man. Now, that is not to say they're a man of God. That's just to say they're God's man. And so the fact that Trump is there tells me God has put him there to serve his purposes, whatever they may be, whether I can discern that, whether I even agree with that or not. The point is, God has put him there to do something. So in that respect, I pray for Trump. I pray for his administration. And I pray that they will pursue what is righteous, what is godly, those things that are not just, okay.
You got, it's God calling you right now.
Okay. Well, I wasn't expecting that. Not sure how to shut that down. Anyway, my point was this, that we need to pray for this administration to pursue righteousness and to make decisions that are righteous. And if they do that, then you can expect that the hounds of hell are going to come up from everywhere. And those people that are breaking things and burning things and destroying things, they're anarchists, which is what? They are lawless. And lawlessness is the definition of the spirit of Antichrist. That's what we're up against here.
Yeah, and we're seeing more lawlessness than I've ever seen in my life. Joseph said the tares are ripening for the Antichrist to come, which is absolutely what you're basically alluding to. And Frida says that brought to light doesn't necessarily mean it will happen immediately. What we've come to expect in our fast food mentality.
I agree with Frida on that. I do. And that's why we have to be cautious in our judging. We have to be patient in the sense that we need to allow, if God is at work here to bring these things to light, we need to let it be done in his time, because he's going to be teaching us. He's going to be through this to draw us closer to him. And I'm not trying to, kind of hog the conversation here, but something that comes to mind is that everything that I get upset about, and particularly when it comes to politics and things that are going on and the unrighteousness of it, God always has a way of saying, okay, Bill, what are you going to do? How are you going to respond? How are you going to allow this to, are you going to use this and allow it to pull you away from me or draw you closer to me? So we need to understand that when God does things, it doesn't happen exactly when and how we think it should. But in the meantime, he's still calling us to look to him, to learn how to deal with these things that are going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Tammy says that we need more discernment in the church and fasting for what's going on and what we're seeing. As kind of said in the beginning, people can you can get a lot of anxiety looking at what's happening in the news, watching the left, watching Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and everybody else, coming after this president and Jeff Sessions, for example, when he met with the Russian ambassador. We're finding out that he was asked by Obama at one point, when he was senator to talk to the Russian ambassador.
Does it sound like set up to anybody other than me? I mean, maybe that's just a coincidence. I don't know.
Yeah. No, yeah. So, when we have Nancy who met, and Chuck Schumer who met with, not only Schumer met with Putin a long time ago, and Nancy met with the Russian ambassador that she claims she didn't meet with. Which she did. There are pictures of that. So, again, you look at that and it's so dark. It's so evil. And it's beyond politics.
Well, I don't know and won't pretend to know what the Russian connection and the Trump administration is. I don't know. Maybe there's just acquaintances. Maybe it was business. I don't know, but the hypocrisy of others is just maddening. Yes. And it reminds me of something that I've always shared with my family and my friends, is that those that are doing the accusing the most are usually those that are accusing others of what they themselves are guilty of.
Yep, absolutely.
So I'm not surprised to hear these stories about Putin and Schumer and Pelosi and the Russian ambassador, et cetera.
Now, Frida says that, God is always in control, despite the out of control appearance of today or tomorrow. And that again is absolutely the truth. I mean, and I think that's one thing that when we do get anxious and we do worry, we have to know that God has a plan. God always has. It's laid out. We don't always understand the plan or his timing, but we know that we don't need to worry. It's going to take place, and there's a reason that it is taking place. And I think, as humans, we try to control everything, and we have to learn that we don't have control. We really don't. It's an illusion to think that you do.
No, we don't have control, but we do have a role to play.
Yes.
And this brings to mind, because it's the right season as well, the story of Purim, and this is the story of Esther, as recorded in the book of Esther. And what's interesting about that story, Susan, is that God is never mentioned in the book of Esther. His name is never there. There's never even a hint of God in that, unless you're looking beyond the events and seeing what's taking place behind the scenes. And God is moving behind the scenes and orchestrating things, from the fact that Vashti, the Persian queen, is called upon to go to a party and she doesn't want to go. And so she's put away. And so lo and behold, you have this Benjamite girl, this little Jewish girl by the name of Hadassah, who just happens to be chosen to be the queen of all Persia. Why? Right. Because God knew before anyone else did that there was this guy by the name of Haman, who, by the way, was a descendant of Esau. That there's this guy named Haman who hates God's people, and he is plotting. He is getting a little enclave of a shadow government working behind the scenes, using the authority that the king has given him to do something outside of the king's will, and then hatching this plot to destroy God's people. God knew that was going to happen. So he already had those people in place who could expose the plot, bring it to light, and those that had tended evil for God's people, that evil was brought upon them. What they intended to do against God's people, they suffered the consequences of. So I forget who made the comment, but it is true. God really is in control. And we need to remember that. And that's why we need to stay close to him through all this, because he is orchestrating the events. And who knows who he's going to put in place at the proper time to expose and bring all these things to light. So it's a very good observation, whoever said that.
Yeah, and Suzanne is saying that I think God is awakening his people to be the light just before the harvest. However, being human and fair game for the adversary, one can become confused and depressed by all the slings, barbs, and fake news. Yeah.
Well,
true.
It is true, and I'll tell on myself a little bit here. I had to turn my TV off because it was on, Fox News or whatever other I happened to be watching, except in NBC. Never watched that. I turned it off because I was getting so depressed watching all this, hearing all this. And I don't believe that we need to ignore and stick our heads in the sand and pretend it's not happening. I don't think that's the approach. But when we see these things happening, and I'm addressing the issue of, it's hard as humans not to be swept away by all this. When we see these things, we need to let it be a provocation to get our eyes back on God. To look unto Jesus, Yeshua, the author and the finisher of our faith. Get our eyes on him, because, and this is the analogy I've always used when this kind of a comment or question comes up. Messiah walks to his disciples in the middle of the night on the water. They're in the ship. They're being tossed to and fro. There's a storm swirling around them. The winds are blowing, and they can't make it to shore. And so all of a sudden, out of the darkness, he comes walking to them. And do you remember Peter said, "Hey, if it's you, let me come to you."
Right.
And he said, "Oh, wait, come on, Peter, come on." So Peter climbs out of the boat and he starts walking on the water until he got his eyes on fake news and black helicopters and FEMA camps and Obamacare and all these things that were swirling all around him. Those things were still happening. He had to be conscious of those things. But my point here is, when he got focused on those things, he took his focus off Messiah, and that's when he's saved. And so I want to be clear. I'm not saying that we should ignore all of this. We can't. We need to be conscious of these things. We don't need to stick our heads in the sand. We do need to speak up for righteousness each and every day. But we need to make sure that our focus is always on God, always, because he is the one who can help us get through this storm.
And I know for me, Bill, there are people out there that have different opinions on this. I believe in the rapture myself. And when I see all of this happening, I can let it go. Even I'm entrenched in it all day long, the politics of everything, but I can let it go and be excited for the fact that I know that God draws near, that my redemption is near. And I do believe that the rapture is closer than it's ever been before. And so I look at it as my blessed hope, and I know that it's coming. And Philip a moment ago said, Satan already knows basically, that he has a short period of time. And, that's why Philip is making the point. That's why we see so much going on with evil out there that we've seen recently, because Satan knows that his time is short. And, I believe in that.
Well, you and I differ a little bit on this as far as the timing of it all. I'm good with it if it happens real soon. I'm okay with it. I'm not sure that we've kind of gotten to the end of everything just yet. But in the meantime, we do need to be reminded that Messiah told us that when you see all these things happening, and part of that was this unrest on the earth, that when you see these things happening, it's not for you to be looked down and to be downcast and depressed, but it's for us to look up, lift up our heads, because our redemption is at hand. So, yes, we need to look beyond the camouflage of what is temporal to find the things that are truly meaningful, the things that are eternal, and focus on those things. Yes, be of good courage, Henrietta says. Exactly.
Exactly. And when I say the rapture is near, I don't, I have no idea when that's coming.
You don't mean next Tuesday necessarily.
I not necessarily, but hopefully, that would be great.
Well,
but
like I said, that would be okay with me. So
yeah, because I think it is something that we have to remember, that there is a plan that God has. There is a plan for us. And, for me, I look at it as, and Tammy is saying, just be ready, which is true. Just be ready. And I look at it for, the things that I do. I feel like I'm a watchman. I'm supposed to tell people about what's going on. And maybe not so much to teach them the politics about things, but to say, you see what's going on. This is hard as human beings to handle all of this stuff. What do you need to do? Look towards God. Yeah.
Well, again, we don't need to stick our heads in the sand where these things are concerned. And in fact, for instance, something that might be meaningless to many, but the fact that the Pope was calling on Catholics to reduce the number of children that they have, and why? Yes. What was the purpose? For the good of the earth, that might slip by somebody and not nobody really think anything of it. But to a lot of Catholics, they take what he says as well. If he's saying that maybe we need to reduce the number of our children, then maybe we need to do that. And I would say, and I'm trying to make a point here, well, I hear what the Pope is saying, but what did God say? And what is God saying? Actually, I think God read that God said, I'll get it out here in a minute. I hadn't had enough coffee today. He said that man and wife are to be fruitful, to multiply, and get this, fill the earth. Fill the earth. He didn't say that we are to limit the number of children for the benefit of the planet. He said, fill the planet up with people. So my point in that was, if you hadn't have brought that to my attention, I would have never even heard of that. But there's 1 billion Catholics or more out there that are hearing what the Pope said. And how many of them are going to compare that to what God actually said? And so that's the value of someone being the watchman and saying, here's what's going on. Here's what's happening over here. And then as we kind of accumulate this data, now let's see, what does God say about this? What does God have to say about not having as many children because you're worried about the planet? He made the planet to be filled with people. I think he can handle it.
Yeah. I think he understands what to do. Yeah.
I have a friend of mine who likes to say all the time, God is smarter than we are.
Yes.
So if he said fill the planet, hey, then I guess that's what he meant.
Yeah, and let me go a little bit deeper in the political end of what the ramifications are for that for me, and I think that people need to look at. And I don't, if there are any Catholics in here, I don't mean to offend anybody, but this is just my opinion. So, when you're looking at it, this Pope, and I don't think it's a secret, is a socialist, and he's more of a socialist than any Pope that we've ever had. He's also a globalist, and he's starting to get in some things, some areas, especially this one. He's getting more and more away from biblical principles and what God says. That concerns me. And if I were Catholic, that would concern me a lot. Also, on the other hand, looking at it, we have Christians and Islam on the other side. And the less children that Christians have, the more children. Islam isn't under the principles that the Pope has just espoused. That Islam believes continue to have as many children and continue to multiply, and they're multiplying at a very fast rate, at such a rate that in 2050, Islam may be the religion in the United States. So if you have a Catholic priest who is saying, stop having children, you're going to have an issue over here with Islam perhaps taking over our country faster than it already is, and that's a problem.
Well, look, if someone was saying to a young couple that they don't have two nickels to rub together, if they were saying, maybe you should kind of get a little established first, get your feet underneath you before you start a family, okay, I would say that's just good counsel. All right. But if you're saying stop having children because your children are going to use up all the resources and the planet's going to be in trouble, then that speaks against, as far as I'm concerned, what the Creator said in the very beginning. And so that's where I'm coming at. This kind of a topic is that, people, well, I want to be very careful how I say this, and out of respect for anyone who's listening that may be Catholic. I'm not. Okay. But I don't believe whether it's a Catholic priest or pope or whether it's a Pentecostal evangelist or a Baptist minister, what they say and what they think. And this also goes for what I say or what you say.
Yes.
What we say doesn't supersede what God has said.
Yes.
And so if God said, I want you to be fruitful, I want you to multiply and fill the earth, here's the implication of that. I want you to fill the earth with children who have been taught the truth, who have been taught virtues, who've been taught righteousness, biblically speaking, and fill the earth up with that. Because now we're dealing with the consequences of the fact that the earth isn't filled with righteousness and virtue and those biblical principles. That's why we're having the problems that we do have. So to come out and say Christians don't have any more children or don't have any because we're worried about the planet flies in the face of what God said. Now, there's one other aspect of this. It is very important that we understand that we weren't to fill the earth with corrupt people. We were to fill the earth with righteous people, righteous children, people who have been taught what is right, what is wrong, according to what God says. So anyway, we could go on down that road a little bit more, but I guess it's suffice it to say, based on what I've understand about what he said, I don't agree. And I'm just glad that there are people like you that are saying, hey, did you hear what this guy said? Or did you hear what's going on? There have to be these watchmen who are seeing the day approaching. This is what Ezekiel says. You see the day approaching. You have to sound the alarm. You have to wake people up to what's going on. Because if we don't, then if something bad happens to them, that's on me. That's on you. So.
Absolutely. Well, and again, you make a very good point. Doesn't matter if it's the Pope saying it. Doesn't matter if it's a pastor down the street. If whoever is saying it is going against biblical principles, then we need to inform people that that's what's happening, because we are the watchmen. We know that it is contrary to biblical principles. We have an obligation when we know that to say something about it in our own way, whichever, whether mine is on writing articles or on the radio, yours is having the speeches that you give and the writings that you do. Each of us have a different way of doing it, but it doesn't mean that we sit silently and allow people. We know that people are being deceived.
Right.
Is what I'm saying. I think we have an obligation to say something.
Well, now, since we're talking about deceived people, what did you think of these people who got together, some of them celebrities, to cast a spell or cast a curse on Trump and the Trump administration? And from what I understand, this got a lot of applause from some media sources and from celebrities and all this. I'm sure you've heard about that.
Oh yeah. It didn't get enough news. It didn't get enough coverage. I find that it's so incredibly evil. It sort of stems from the DNC when they denied God. And then now we're putting curses on the president of the United States. If you had done this 10 years ago, 5 years ago against, former President Obama or any other of the other former presidents, people probably would have locked you up. But now it is more acceptable to do things like that. It's becoming not the norm, but we're introducing it. And the next step is let's make it a normal practice.
Well, I guess I wanted to ask that question because it goes back to something we talked about earlier. We're not just battling political forces and political philosophies here. We're battling spirits. Our warfare is not carnal, we're told. And so we're not going to win this war with bullets and bombs or even at the ballot box. Win this war by going in humility to God and in repentance to God. And I saw a comment come up there. I didn't catch the name, but said you can't curse what God has blessed.
Tammy said that, yes.
Okay. Absolutely right. And so here is how believers need to approach this issue. And if we had the president's ear, this is what I would say to him. If you live a life that is in concert with God's word and you make decisions that are righteous according to biblical principle, then you will be blessed. And if you're blessed, you will never have to worry about any curse from any witch or any Wiccan or any this or that.
Right.
Because you cannot curse what God has blessed. And so the key here is, and this is for you and me and everybody listening and this country at large, to live a life that God blesses.
Absolutely.
And if we live that kind of a life, then we don't have to worry about these curses.
And I think some people in the very beginning had some doubt about Donald Trump, whether or not he was a believer and how strong he was in his faith. And a lot of pastors gathered around him. And at the time I was a little skeptical. I didn't know what to think. I think and this is just perception, because we're all on the outside looking in. We don't really know what goes on in his personal life. But from the outside looking in, I feel more confident in him that he is now, because of the gravity of what he's facing with being the leader of the free world. This is something that I believe has sort of propelled him closer to God, and having these pastors around him to remind him and pray for him. I think it has really helped him overall. That's what my perception.
I'm still approaching this with caution. I'm optimistic to a point. I'm encouraged to a point. I feel like that we need to, as far as whether or not he's a believer, I don't know. Yeah. All I can do is observe the fruit. And, I'm not expecting, if he's a new believer, I'm not expecting perfection, because I'm still working on that myself, So I'm not expecting someone to be perfect in that regard. But I am kind of just waiting and seeing what the fruit is going to look like.
Yeah.
I will be the first to applaud those things that I think are right and righteous and in line with holiness. But I'm also going to be the first in line to be critical of those things that are the opposite of that.
Right.
So overall, I am cautiously optimistic. At the same time, there are other things that give me pause, that concern me. And so here's how I'm going to approach it. I'm going to approach it this way. I'm going to pray for him that if he's not close to God, that he will get close to God. I'm going to pray that the people that are around him are going to give him godly counsel, and that he'll heed that godly counsel. And I'm going to pray that God will draw him so close that he will go beyond being a president to being and I know this is going to offend some people, but being a pastor, in the sense that he is not only going to lead the way politically, but he's going to lead the way spiritually. And I know that's a real tall order. And some people would say, that's impossible, Bill, or that's not even necessary, Bill. You're confusing politics with religion. Hey, if we don't have a spiritual renewal, if we don't turn back to God as a nation, there won't be a nation to save.
It's true. It's very true. And I think that we do need to expect from him to be a godly man, and not to put so much faith in him as a man.
Right. He can't save us.
No, he can't.
He's not going to save us.
Right.
But we can pray that the one who can save us will draw this man closer to him.
Absolutely.
That's what I'm praying, and the fact that you have this, all these forces on the other side working so desperately to dismantle his administration and to derail anything he's doing, says to me that whether I like him or not, I need to be praying for him and praying for his administration to do what is right and godly. Maybe that's the very thing that will provoke him to draw closer to God.
Exactly.
Is all these attacks, because I know how it works in my life. So we need to pray for him, and we need to pray for those around him. And we need to pray, Susan, that those around him who would lead him astray down a path that takes him away from what's righteous and holy, that would be exposed too, and those would be removed from that circle. That's what we need to pray.
And I think we do need to pray for his protection and the protection of the vice president and everyone concerned, and continue to pray that he understands and draws closer to God, because I think we have a responsibility too, in the fact that he's not a man who is going to save us, right? Mm-hmm. We have an obligation to, as the Christians, believers out here, to pray for him, to give him that wisdom of the people around him, from us praying for him, that God will talk to him. And I think that we need to, as a leader of our country and somebody who is trying to bring us out of the darkness that we've been in for 8 years and longer, that we have an obligation, if you want to have that obligation, to pray for him and pray that he becomes a more godly man.
Well, like I said, there were some things that I am encouraged by. One of the things that I'm encouraged by is the fact that he has been so outspoken in his defense of Israel and wanting to mend the relationship with Israel. Because let's face it, we just saw the most anti-Israel administration in modern time. Well, in our lifetime. In
a long time.
Right. Yeah. So, I'm encouraged by that, and I just don't think you can go wrong with saying that we're going to be friends and allies with Israel, because the God of Israel is watching. So there are a lot of things that I'm really encouraged about. And I just pray that, again, that Mr. Trump would go beyond just being a political leader, but that not necessarily wearing it on his sleeve, but by his actions, by the fruit that he bears, that he will be a spiritual leader as well. And I realize that people are laughing right now. It's the thought of that. But you know what? If God is at work, with God, nothing is impossible.
Nothing is impossible. And we've already started some steps, while they may be, kind of superficial. We're bringing prayer back in the White House. We have the First Lady who's saying the Lord's Prayer. And that's, for a lot of people are saying, well, that's not a big step. Well, that's a step, because we haven't heard that in quite some time. It's very good to, in the inauguration, to hear God mentioned over and over, and, let's pray. And I can't tell you what that did for me. And I was so glad to hear that. We have a few minutes left. I wanted to just ask people who are out there, if you have any questions for either Bill or myself or both of us that you would like to ask, now is the time to do that. I want to give you an opportunity to have your own questions, or anything that you've heard that you have questions about that you want to ask, further comment or anything else. And if not, we'll move on. But I did want to give you that opportunity.
And they're thinking, well, Bill hasn't shut up long enough for me to ask a question.
Well, and I think you probably covered a lot of it, and probably a lot of the questions that they had, you have covered that. And I just think that, our country, where we're moving, I think all of us have realized, and all of us who are believers, we have to be more into prayer. We have to be more into reading the Word of God and walking in that faith and all, because so much is happening that is just, unbelievable. We can't do it ourselves. Henrietta's asking, Bill, when are you coming to San Diego?
Well, I don't know. It's been a few years since I've been to San Diego, but maybe something will work out. You people in California need to get some of the state government so that I won't feel like I'm in another country when I get. No, I'm
you will
teasing, kind of, sort of.
Yeah. You'd be surprised. You have to go to the red counties, because I'm in California, right? And you have to go to the red counties, and then you will feel like you're back in Tennessee.
I know. I'm playing. I've got a lot of good friends in California, particularly Southern California.
Yeah.
Even in LA County. Wow. And
you know what? Sad to hear that. I'm just kidding.
And there is one good thing I can say about California, and that is In-N-Out Burger.
Oh yeah. Yeah. We do have that over you. Trust me. We have that. Now, Joseph has a question. Bill, was the rabbi's prayer at Trump's inauguration, pray the Jerusalem if I forget you, versus a sign that the end times are approaching? Did you
I understand the question, and okay. I wouldn't say that it was necessarily a sign of the end times approaching in and of itself. Overall, I thought that the rabbi and the different ministers that were there that gave the invocations and the prayers, overall, as my family and I sat and watched that, we were encouraged that God was there in the inaugural proceedings.
Yes.
Now, what people's motivation was, I don't know. I'm just saying, from my perspective, watching it and looking at it, I was just excited to hear the name Jesus. I was excited to hear God being called upon. I thought that was a great moment. I'm just hopeful that now there's going to be follow-up on that, and that people will be seeking God as never before. And I'm talking about people in the administration.
Frida asks, can you talk about the fine line between being judgmental and being watchful?
Well, I think there's a big misconception in Christianity that we're not supposed to judge at all. That's not true. We're supposed to judge righteous judgment. And so as we're being watchful and we're seeing what's going on, and we're gathering all of the facts, not rushing to conclusions, but as we gather all the information and then compare it to what does God say, we can make judgments. We are supposed to make judgments. Test the spirits to see if they are of God. So if we're being watchful and then we're just jumping to conclusions without having all the facts, that would be wrong. That's being judgmental. But if we're making a judgment based on what is actually happening, the facts of the case, and then comparing it to see how it lines up with the Word of God, we are supposed to make judgments on those kinds of things. There's a
And you
whole
have
book of the
to.
Bible named Judges.
Yeah, I mean, everything is so politically correct, and we're told to be tolerant, and which for a lot of people, unfortunately, that means you don't judge anything. You just go along with the flow, and you can't do that. God never said to do that.
Right. We are not called to be people who coexist. We are called to be people who are set apart, which means that we're judging things.
Tammy has a question for you. Hi, Bill. Do you think that we are the generation that will see the coming of the Lord, since we are the generation that saw Israel become a nation? She said, did I say that right?
Well, I understand exactly what she's asking. I'm going to preface my answer with this statement. I always reserve the right to be wrong. So I feel that we are living in the last days. Is the Messiah going to return next week? Next year? I don't know. And frankly, I kind of doubt it. That's just my opinion. Okay. But I do believe that we are in the last days. And I believe that all these different things that are going on are saying to us, just like we said earlier, to look up, lift up your heads. Our redemption is at hand. When you're seeing all these troubles and all these nations and all the perplexity and all this stuff, you know that your redemption's at hand. So I can't be more specific than that. Because, you know, the Lord's going to do what the Lord's going to do.
Right.
But I need to be ready, you know?
Right. We never know the timing, but we can see the signs, and we as believers and followers of God, we do see the signs. People say it's like a thief in the night, and everybody thinks, well, I'll never know when God's coming. But God told us that we, the believers, will see the signs, and we are seeing the signs of the fact that God is returning. Exactly when, we don't know. But it's enough to know as believers that there are signs all over the place that God is returning. I want to thank everybody for coming today. We will be back next week, same time. I'll put up another event for you to spread that out to everybody. Bring more people in. Tell them about our show so that we can get the word out. I'm going to try to put all of this up on my SusanKnowles.com later. I know Bill is going to, if I can get it to him, he's going to have to, put it up on his stuff as well. And it's going to be on the Facebook page. So spread it, if you will, to everybody so that we can come back and have more conversations like this. Hopefully you enjoyed everything today, and this was what you wanted to hear. I want to bring you more programs like this. Everybody's saying thank you, and they did enjoy the show, so that's really great. If you have any comments, you can make comments on the page that this is going to be on Facebook, and I will see those comments and pass them along to Bill. But we'd like to thank each and every one of you for being here, and Bill, thank you so much for being here today as well.
Oh, it was my pleasure, and just everyone out there, hey, give us some feedback. This is our first go at this. And we'll be excited to hear your comments and see what we can do here.
Yeah, we're keeping Tammy from a final, but she said she really loves the show. So let's pray for Tammy that she does extra well on her finals. Thank you, Tammy, for taking the time. So again, thank you, everyone. God bless you, and we'll see you again next week.